This is a bunch of countries and some companies agreeing not to attack each other in cyberspace during peacetime. But if the U.S., China, Iran, North Korea, Israel, Russia aren't signing on, how much teeth does this actually have?
Well, look, Emily, part of the challenge here with the Paris call is that it's a statement of principles. It's not really anything binding under international law. It's a sort of set of common things that these groups and these companies and these countries agreed to. And in a lot of ways, you know, a lot of it's motherhood and apple pie. Everyone agrees that these are positive things, things that are useful for the world and the community agreeing. But there are the details which are complicated and probably the reason why some of these major countries, include our allies like Australia, didn't sign on to.
So how is this actually going to work? And how will they actually make sure that, you know, the folks who've signed this are standing by their agreement?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of implementation left to go on. This isn't in an agreement in the sense of an international binding instrument. It's a statement of ideas and concepts they've committed themselves to working towards. Of course, what's interesting about this accord is that the majority of signatories, you know, almost 200 plus of the 300 signatories are universities, nonprofits, companies. Are not nation states. And so that makes this an interesting agreement or statement of principles, because it's not your typical participants in international affairs, and they're seeking to bind the classic participants, nation states.
What do you read into the U.S. opting out more specifically?
Well, I think part of it is, you know, there's a lot of the devil's the details here. And so we're talking about international law, international human rights law. The U.S. is typically very careful in this space and wants to define things, understand what they mean before we sign up to things that might bind us later on down the road. We've seen all sorts of documents be utilized in international litigation before the UN to say, look, you agreed to this, so you've got to stand by every single last word here, even though we didn't define what it meant. And the U.S. is usually very cautious in that space.
The U.S. midterm elections are over, though there are some votes still being counted. There are recounts happening in Florida, also outstanding decisions in Georgia. That said, what do you think the biggest threats are out there right now?
Well, look, when it comes to cyber, obviously we've got huge nation-state threats. We've got countries like China that's continuing to seek American intellectual property. Iran, North Korea, hard to deter. And Russia still actively looking to manipulate the U.S. electoral system, not necessarily for outcomes, but to create dissension in our ranks. So while they may not have gotten involved in this election, there's still a possibility of 2020. We need to be constantly vigilant of that. And what that means is companies and industry have to come together with the government, work together, create collective defense systems both at home and abroad, working with our allies. A lot of work to do here. Important that we work together in a collective way to find a solid path forward.
What kind of threats from Russia specifically do you think we should be watching out for? I mean, how do you imagine they might change their tactics going into 2020?
Well, look, we've revealed a lot about what we know. We revealed that we were inside some of their systems identifying these communications between some of the actors. We knew what was going on. They're going to be a lot more cautious about what they do. They're going to be sharper on how they act. But they're still going to try and mess with our elections. And frankly, they want to be known to do that. Part of what this is about is not just messing with our electoral system and our confidence in our institutions, but it's making Russia look bigger and more powerful than it actually is. Its economy is not strong. It is not in a good place internationally, but it's looking like a bigger player by monkeying with us and making our own politicians sort of go at each other's throats. And that's something we need to avoid as a nation. We need to work together in a bipartisan way to address these threats.